Okay.
Laura, what I'm going to call her? What is this thing called that she's doing? Laura. She's my beautiful photographer. What is this thing?
Video conference?
Yes, video conference.
All right, let's see. Hi, Dr. Ken.
Hi, good morning.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm fabulous. I'm Laura.
Hi, Laura. Nice to meet you.
You can't even see me. Oh, there I am. Yeah,
me.
I'm here.
Sorry, girlfriend. You can hate yourself.
Okay.
There's our spiritual leader.
Hey. Hello. I try to see if I get the.
What are you going to tell us?
Hi.
For a little trip?
It's something. I gotta get the audio up there. I'm sure that's that.
Okay, everybody needs to be quiet for a minute so we can make sure the audio is working.
It's working. He's talking, but it's coming out of the computer,
Okay.
and I don't know where to change it.
Here?
Speakers. Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, is it coming out of there? Or-
No.
it's not coming out of there. See, that should be the
Here, I'll make that.
microphone.
Oh, Logitech, maybe that one? Oh, no. Oh, no.
That was where it
That's a
was.
microphone.
That's-
Oh.
I thought it was the second one. Audio options. Let's see what we have here. Test computer audio. Here we go. Maybe I can do it here. There we go.
I'm calling you.
Oh, that's HP. No. Because I don't want the HP.
HP is the, yes, you do.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I thought the computer was HP.
We have.
Hold on. No. No, this is my video. You're empty. Your
My son.
Oh, your son, Gabriel? How old is it?
Okay.
10. Sorry, Mary, 1 second. Dr. Ken, can we try again? How are you?
Can you hear us, Dr. Ken?
Yep, I can hear you.
Oh,
Perfect. Good. We're good. Okay.
I got it. We got it.
Laura, you rock.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, bye. All right, is everybody here?
Sure does.
Come on. Here we go.
Okay.
Full screen. All right.
Do we look good?
Yeah, you do. I wish I were there. You look like you're connected and that you're happy, and this is a great thing.
Yeah. So we're gonna wait for one more person to come in and then we'll start.
Yeah, I like your new haircut.
Thanks. Are you ready to work in your garden after this?
Yes, I am. It's a gardening day. It's beautiful and sunny. It's just gorgeous. That's why I'm in my red gardening t-shirt. So
I think I have the same exact one. That's what I'm doing for Mother's Day. Is after
yes.
I'm gonna get dirty and get my garden.
Well, the red works really good because it attracts the bees, so it's nice. They just think I'm a flower.
Oh, you are a flower, Dr. So again, so you are our very special guest today, and I want to say thank you for agreeing to spend some of your Saturday morning with us. And we've been spending, this is our second weekend together, talking about all the different concepts of spiritual leadership. And I really felt that it was important to hear from you, about what you think about the importance of becoming a spiritual leader for our community and our world today. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, being the spiritual leader for Centers for Spiritual Living is probably one of the best things that I have ever done in my life. And I'm not talking about the spiritual leader of the whole organization. I'm talking about being a spiritual leader of a center. I don't know if any of you know very much about me, but my wife and I began our center in 1993 in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, which was our hometown. We were students of Dr. Tom Costa out of Palm Desert, California. I was down there. I was a farmer down there, and Deb and I were farming. And we found Science of Mind and stepped into it. And the last 23 years, it has been the most fulfilling position and job that I've ever done in my life. It was something that I was called to. And it certainly has given me everything I seek and everything I look for. I've also, though, I must honestly say, is that a great many people in that 23 years have come and gone. They haven't necessarily stuck with it. And I believe that the reason that they probably have is because they never satisfied their own calling in the process of doing it. And they allowed other things to get between them and the truth that they seek and the truth of the expression. What we teach in Science of Mind, when you boil it all down and you render it into the nothingness that it really is, what we teach is authenticity. What our goal is to bring forward from the individual the true self. And I'm not talking about the self that you think is true. I'm talking about the self that is really true, that part of ourselves that we're never separate from, but that we hide, that we bury, and that we put away. And so in order to be a good spiritual leader, in my opinion, and this is all my opinion, of which I have great respect, I think it's really important to first and foremost do your own work. There will be many, many occasions in the next 20 years or 30 years or 40 years for each of you to be able to be pulled into that side of yourself which tends the resentment. And when you do that, when you allow yourself to rise to a certain level of pissed-offtivity in your life, what occurs with it is that you block out all the goodness and all the greatness and all the purpose. If I could ask you to do any one thing, it would be to remember this moment as you strive to become ministers and as you're taking your classes and you're working diligently and quite hard, to be quite honest, and onerously. I would suggest that you make some adjustments in your consciousness if necessary. For all I know, you've already done a lot of these things and you don't have to. But my observation is that a large portion of people don't do it. And that is to really find it within yourself to know that what you're doing is for you and what you're doing is about you. That it's not about growing a big center. It's not about getting the accolades. It's not becoming a star. That what it is it really is an avenue of your own expression, your divine expression. And not to give up on that, even when times become a little bit dark and dreary sometimes. Instead, just to keep pegging away at it and doing your own work and healing your own consciousness. When Deb and I started, we started with absolutely nothing. We moved 2,000 miles back to our hometown. We opened the doors of our center, and we'd come from a church in a center of 1,200 people. So we thought automatically that, gee, first place we go to that has 1,200 people in it, we're going to build a church. And it was somewhat of a surprise to find out that at our first service, we had 12 people show up and be in attendance. And of those 12 people, 8 of them were our family members. So there was really... And from there, we built a very successful church, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. And we did it mostly by modeling the teaching and living within the teaching. I'm extremely blessed that Dr. Deborah and I have been together for all these years. I think it's 42 years this year. And we've built this ministry together because we keep each other on task and we keep each other in principle. And this is an absolutely important thing to do. Ministry and to be a spiritual leader within the ministry, it becomes important for you to be able to be in alignment with what you do and to really know the value that you're bringing to the world and to know that that value, that expression of that value that you do is the most calling thing in your whole life. When I came up here and started the center, I thought I was going to be some kind of a guru. I thought this is just wonderful. I'm going to be just like Dr. Tom. And I showed up, and I can remember I did my first 4 or 5 services, and I was so intellectual. I tried to get all my notes together, and I would read my talks, and I was wondering, A, why it wasn't overly attractive, and B, why I wasn't having a whole pile of fun doing it. And the reason I wasn't having a whole pile of fun doing it is because it wasn't who I was. And so the day that I threw my notes away, which was 4 or 5 weeks in, and said, I'm just going to speak from my heart, was the day that I began to get joy back into what I was doing. That I began to actually express as myself instead of expressing as something else. And to do that, what I had to do is I had to walk out on the skinny branches of what I thought and who I thought I was in the first place. I had to actually go out and actually be myself. And shock of all shocks is that it began to work. And when I started to do my talks from my heart, that didn't necessarily mean they were better talks. Don't get me wrong. However, they were more authentic, and they were more transparent, and they were more real. And that's what attracts people to you to be in ministry in the first place, is to be authentic and be real. And I repeat, I'm not talking about the real you think you need to be. I'm talking about the real that you really are. That part of yourself that sings when you do something. So to begin with, to move into ministry and to move into leadership, the first thing you need to know is that you're really not leading anyone. What you're doing is you're reflecting the truth of who you are into the world around you. And the closer you can get to that, the greater teacher you will become through that, and the greater leader that you'll come through that. Every time I get stuck in my life, every time I get conflict in my life, every time I have something in my life that isn't working and that I'm digesting or chewing, you know what I'm talking about, digesting and chewing. There's something that's an irritant that's around you that is bringing you down, holding you back into what you can do. Every time that I've ever done that, what has happened is that I've become restrained and closed off to the teaching. I still know the stuff, so I still know the right words to say, but the unfortunate thing is I don't know how to express them if I've got something between me and it, and the thing itself doing the expression. And so people know that inherently. They can feel it and they can sense it. They see it in what's going on. And there's exercises in my spiritual practices that I use when I run into problems like that and issues like that. And probably the premier one that I use, and I probably do it a couple of times a year, and that is that I give away my need to be something that I'm not. I give away my need to have titles. I give away my need to have money. I give away my need to be married. I give away my need to be a father. And when I do those things, when I take that activity and that action, what occurs for me is that I suddenly free myself. Because every time I run into a conflict like that, sometimes I can work my way through it. And like I say, I don't do this all the time, but sometimes when I work my way through it, what occurs for me is that it works out. However, here's the key. When there's something big happening in my life and I'm going through it and I can't seem to get over it, what it has to do with is a fear of loss within me. And when I face that fear of loss, I found that it's more effective to give way to it and just be prepared to give everything up. And the minute that I do that, what happens is everything is attracted to me. I move through that veil of consciousness into a new idea, and there everything that I thought I had to give up in order to be complete actually shows up pressed down and flowing over. So I guess what I'm doing is I'm starting off by telling you that it's necessary, in my opinion, to have a really grounded practice so that you can stay clean in how you do your ministry. And if you do that, what will happen is everything that's required will be drawn and attracted to you, and everything that's unlike that is something for you to learn so that you can dissipate and dissolve it, so that you can get rid of it and move through from there. And this is one of the biggest things that moved me into ministry and allowed me to stay in it for 23 years joyfully. joyfully. Because if I can't do it joyfully, then I'll do something else. And like I say, for me with ministry, the joyfulness is exactly what has driven me and pulled me all these years. And so I keep myself clean to the best of my ability. When I run into a conflictual situation, or when I run into a situation where something I feel is being withheld from me, something that might develop a resentment within myself, what I do is I forgive it and I move forward almost immediately now. In the old days, I used to hang on to it and drag it around with me for a while because it felt so damn good to have that weight around my neck and to be right. And giving it up. You know, Marcia Sutton said that resentment blocks prosperity and money follows love. Well, money's just energy. So resentment blocks prosperity, and the energy that you seek follows love. And if you can set yourself up so that you're in a loving situation with your own self and your own being, then the end result is that you'll be well placed and well positioned to have the consciousness to be a science of mind minister and to be able to move forward and really live and teach the modeling and model what it is that you are learning right now to take out into the world. How many of you are intending on becoming pulpit ministers? Just raise your hand. Excellent, excellent. I'm encouraged by that. I really am. You know, the other thing that I've learned to enter into leadership in the first place, and when I say these things, what I'm saying is that the skills that I learned in 1993, 94, 95, 2014, 2016, March, the skills I learned yesterday are the skills that I use in leadership today. It's not something that I could get from a book because it is so energetic and heart-centered that it has to come from your own being. And so the requirement to be a good leader for your congregation is a requirement to really do that work and stick to it. Because, you know, there's a lot of funny people out there. And there are, I'm not going to say they intentionally wish you harm, but there's a lot of people who, if they see a niche in your armor, they will begin to try to find a way to pry into it. And the actual truth is that you don't need the armor in the first place, and then they don't have to pry. They can just see it and be open with it, and you can just be honest with who you are. And to develop that was probably the most challenging thing I had to do in the early days of ministry, to actually begin to move in that direction so that I could enter into it. And to do that, what it required was me to grow into my faith, my belief, to know that what we teach, where we say that everything works out for the highest and best good when we do surrender, that it actually operates and works. And that surrendering aspect is everything. It keeps you sane. I've seen so many ministers over the years that I've been in ministry drop out because they weren't prepared to surrender. I can remember in the mid-90s, I was at a conference in Vancouver, British Columbia, a religious science conference with International. I was the president of International for 5 years before I became the spiritual leader of centers. And I remember that the person giving the talk was, once again, Dr. Marcia Sutton. And she stood in front of the room, and what she said was, in order to be a good minister, what is required is for you to get on your knees. Mm-hmm. And I can remember in those days, we were not only International, but the United group were as well, that we were a very absolutist group of people. And I can remember hearing one of our teachers in the back say, "I'm a religious scientist. I never get on my knees." And Marcia said, "Oh, excuse me, I misspoke. I didn't mean that you voluntarily get on your knees. In order to be a good minister, what's required is that you will be brought to your knees." And so that was the point she was making. And a great many people got up and they left the room. They literally left. It was very embarrassing. And those of us with ears to hear actually stayed. And she went on with her lecture, and at the end of the lecture, she said, I'd like us to do an exercise now. And I can remember thinking, oh, wow, this is going to be interesting. And what she did was she had us get on our knees and pray in the Muslim fashion, with our head on the floor, with our forehead on the floor. And she said that it's important for us to make sure that our head's below our heart when we do our business. And I would make a suggestion for you that if it's physically possible for you, that you actually try that in the next couple of days. I would suggest that you go home, and that when the day-to-day minutia of taking the class and the stress of going to work and showing up and spending all these hours doing this, when that shows up in your experience and in your life, what I would suggest is that you take 5 minutes or 10 minutes and that you go to a private room and you go into the Muslim pose and you put your head beneath your heart and you do your prayer treatment from there. Because I will tell you, you get different answers when you allow your heart to control you as opposed to your head. And those different answers are the answers which you need as a minister to be a leader of a group of people. Because your words, they can get nowadays from anywhere, but your energy, they can only get from you. They can only find it within your own self and your own being. And they will be attracted to it, and they will come, and you will become great teachers when you begin to realize that it's got nothing to do with your head and it's got everything to do with your heart. And all that information is stored within you. The information you're learning right now isn't going to go anywhere. You're going to have it when you need it. It's going to come forward, and you're going to be able to share it when it's required. And so you don't have to focus on it anymore. It's like an athlete or let's say a golfer. You know, a golfer doesn't think about their swing. A golfer doesn't try to mentally analyze what they're doing when they're actually doing it, right? Perhaps some of you have golfed in the past, and you know the worst thing you can do is turn your head on and turn your heart off. And what will happen is you'll botch the shot every single time. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same thing with snow skiing. I was a ski patroller for years, and when I tried to think my way through a hill, what would happen is I would inevitably fall. I couldn't do it. But if I released and surrendered, then what would happen is there was a core memory within myself that knew exactly how to do it, and I could get down. So if you can visualize an extreme section of some hill someplace and skiing it, if I tried to measure and analyze how many square foot pressure I needed to put on my inside edge to be able to make the turn and all that jumbo that goes with the physics of it, what would happen is I couldn't do anything. But if I stood at the top of the hill and I took a breath and I threw myself off the cliff, then what would happen is my body would automatically go into the motion to get me to the bottom. And that's how come, you know, you see these people when they do things like that, when they do extreme sports and they get to the bottom, and once again, using the skiing analogy, you stop at the bottom and you turn and you look up the hill and you say, wow. Because what you've done is you've turned off your head. And so ideally what you've been in is the greatest meditation, in a physical active meditation that took you down. And that's what we need to do when we do ministry, is we need to have our foundation in our faith and our principles and our values to such a degree, and they need to be so congruent with who we are and so attached with how we live our life that we don't even have to think about it. All we do is we simply do according to what that faith leads us and tends us to do. And I'm under no illusion that we all have the same faith. Don't misunderstand me, or that we all have the same values or the same principles. But what Science of Mind teaches is that you get in touch inherently with the values that belong to you, and that those are values that are life-giving to the world around you. But you can't do it if you allow the fear of the outside world or the fear of loss to prevent you from being in connection with the truth of who you are. It's impossible for us to be able to do that. So it requires that we actually have moments in our life where we practice it by just turning everything off and allowing ourselves to speak from the truth of our being, no matter what the circumstances are. And this makes you not only a good speaker, but it makes you an attractive energy that's going to draw people to you. And it also draws and attracts to you the people who resonate with the truth that you're putting out there. I don't debate my belief system. I talk about it, I teach it, but I never debate it. My job is to teach science of mind, which I do, and I do very, very well. And I don't necessarily agree with everything in science of mind, and that doesn't really matter. The point is that that's what I do for a living, is I teach that. But my spirituality, my connection, my practice is who I am. And that's what I put forward, and that's how I live my life. And when I do it that way, what happens is everything flows. But the minute I put something before me and think that I'm doing it for something outside myself, everything stops and everything blocks, everything freezes into place. And then I begin to develop fears around certain things. And those fears actually become the persona that I am energetically to the people who are around me. And what happens is they no longer feel comfortable to be taught by me, because I'm not acting and modeling the truth that they're really trying to find, which is their resonant authenticity, the truth of who they are. I'll give you another example. Years ago, probably in the 90s, early 90s, just after we started the center, we had this beautiful group of people, couple come to our center, and they were the sweetest people. And they were those people that when there were 12 of us in the center, that always showed up on Sunday morning, and they made the coffee and they set up the chairs. They did everything. They were there. They became really, really close to Deb and I, and they were basically helping with everything with this small group that we were growing into a beautiful church. It was a beautiful church then too, but this small group that we were enlarging and evolving. And I can remember that they were there for about a year and a half, and it was really spectacular. We were really tight with them. We counseled them. We spent a lot of time in conversation together. We married them. We brought them together in union, and we did all of these things, and we gave them all this stuff. And so it was a mutual, what would appear to be a mutually satisfying relationship. And then one Sunday we went to church and they didn't come. They weren't there. And we thought, oh, this isn't good. Well, I guess maybe they took a week off. So the next Sunday we went, and they weren't there then either. And so we began to get concerned. So we tried to phone them, and we couldn't get hold of them, which was unusual. And so we started asking around, and several weeks went by, and I can remember how horrible it felt within myself. It just felt terrible. So I'd done something wrong. And somehow or other, I'd said the wrong thing. And so we finally heard word that the reason that they'd left the center was that they'd become Mormons. Just like that. One Sunday they were at church. Next Sunday they were Mormons. Yeah, it's funny now. At the time, though, I was just, oh God, I was so rocked. It was like, oh, this is terrible. So I really began to foment on that, like a sliver in your finger will begin to create pus around it, so it'll shoot it out, to use a story. And that's exactly what happened. Was this thing began to swell within me of this sense. And at the time, what Deb and I were trying to do is we were trying to get rid of debt. And so coming up from California with the farm, what we did was when we got here to Canada, we didn't have very much money. And we matter of fact, we had $465 when we left California to build our center. And I was once in a conversation with a couple of ministers, and the one minister was saying, we were sitting around a dinner table, and the one minister said, you know, when I left Calgary to start my center, I had $60,000, and I spent every nickel of it starting the center. And the other woman who was there said, well, when my husband and I started our center, we had $70,000, and it cost us every nickel to start our center. And I got to say, when Deb and I started our center, we had $465, and I guarantee you it cost us every nickel to start our center. And that's the truth. Anyway, so we were trying to get rid of debt, all debt. We didn't want to owe anybody anything. It was just not what we wanted to do. And so I was focusing all of my treatment work. I was focusing lots of stuff in my spiritual practice to the total absolution of debt in my life. And of course, my debt just kept growing. Yeah. And it was shocking. And I couldn't figure out how to get over it. And then this circumstance with the Mormons occurred. And by the way, they're back in our center now. They're not Mormons anymore. They didn't like that. You know, one of my favorite jokes is about the ship at sea, and the ship is traveling at sea, and they're traveling along, and they've been at sea for months, and they haven't seen land. And there's a fellow up in the crow's nest. He's looking for land somewhere, and sure enough, after several months at sea, suddenly he looks out and he sees a little bit of mist and then a little bit of land, and he yells, land ho, land ho. And the captain steers the boat towards it. And as they get nearer, they see that there's this magnificent island that's there. And they come closer, and as they get closer, they see that in the island there's a bay. And they get closer, and they get towards where they're getting into the bay, and they can see that on the beach there's 3 buildings, 3 structures. And they get closer to the 3 structures, and they see that there's a guy standing on the beach waving his arms back and forth, trying to call them in. And so they put a boat down, they send the boat to the beach, and all the sailors get out, and they run up to the guy, and the guy says, oh, thank God you're here. I've been here for 15 years. I've been deserted I've been abandoned on a deserted island, and there's just me. There's nobody else here. I'm the only person here, and it's been horrendous being by myself for all this time. Thank God you're here. And so the sailors looking around, they say, well, you know, we can't help but think there's 3 buildings. That's pretty neat. So, you know, what are those buildings? And the guy says, well, you know, that first one, that's my house. That's my home. That's where I live. I say, oh, that's nice. And I say, well, what about the second one? I say, well, that's my church. That's what I built. That's where I go to church. I say, well, that's good. What about the third one? He said, that's the church I used to go to. I have no idea what that has to do with leadership, but get back to it. So there we are in this circumstance where I'm trying to get rid of debt, and these people have left us. And I felt that sense of betrayal and abandonment because of all the different things that I had that were junked up in my mind, my body, my life, my being. And I can remember in my contemplations one day, I was sitting there and I was thinking, gee, you know, how could they possibly have left me after all I did for them? And it suddenly, that jumped out of my mind. And it suddenly occurred to me that I had been doing my ministry with an expectation of return. That I was giving away myself in words. I was saying, you know, I'm here to spend myself. I'm here to serve. I'm here to give you who I am. But that I had an expectation that I was going to get compensated in return for it. I will tell you that over a couple of weeks, I changed my mind around it. And I did it I decided that I would never do another thing with a thought of expectation. that I would not do it for compensation, that I would do it because it was who I was, and because my faith tells me that when I am authentic in who I am, everything is required, is brought into and drawn into my life for me to be able to live my life effectively. So I began to actually practice that. And when people would phone me and they would ask for consultations, I would think, and I would say, I'm not sure, et cetera, et cetera. As a matter of fact, my brother came to me one day and he said, Ken, I need some money. Could you lend me some money? And I had some money. So I said, no, I can't. And he said, well, why not? And I said, because I don't believe in debt. And he said, well, I really need this money, and you've got it. Why don't you lend it to me? And I said, because I won't compromise and allow myself to go into the consciousness of debt. Because by that time, I had eradicated all debt in my life whatsoever by the practice that I'm telling you about. And I said, what I can do is I can give you the money, but I have to talk to Deborah. So I had to go talk to my wife, and I had to get really clean with it. And I think the amount was like $2,500, which back then was a lot of money for me. And so I had to get really clean within my own soul and my own self about it. And when I was clean, I put $2,500 into an envelope, and I went over to his house and knocked on the door and gave it to his wife and said, there you go. She said, thank you. And I said, you're welcome. And I walked away, and I never thought about it again. And 3 months later, he gave me back like $5,000, which is the way it works. But I had to clean up my own stuff in order to be able to do it. We live in a universe where there are two sides to the coin. It's not just that I want to get rid of debt. That means I don't owe anybody. But I have to understand that means nobody owes me. And so that's really been the moniker of my career and in leadership, is that I don't do things from an expectation of something on the outside. The reason is that all disappointment comes from false expectations, unrealistic expectations. The Buddha says all attachment causes pain. And so it sets it up so that what happens is you live that clean life. But to do it, you have to have the discipline and the diligence to actually make the decision and live according to what you think the principles are. And I'd spent most of my life in business, and so debt was something I was very familiar with. But I had to realize that to be the truth of who I was, I could not have that debt in my life and my experience. So I had to clean myself of it, and I did. And that's one example of a little thing that you're drawn into, that you recognize within your own being as not being effective and working. Resentment is such a huge thing in some of our circumstances. People do things with a chip on their shoulder, and they accept things that are done with the chip on their shoulder. And then they wonder why the flavor and the beauty and the joy of their life isn't what they want it to be. And it's because they've compromised their own being and their own self. So the requirement to step into real leadership is a requirement to do it because it's your calling, because it's inherent within yourself, and it's the authenticity of who you are. And when you find yourself in a situation where it doesn't fit, where you don't feel comfortable with it, it's not about going in and giving your letter of resignation. Often it's simply a matter of changing your mind about why and how you do what you do. You guys are at a pivotal time in your life. Within the next few years, you'll find yourself active in ministry, maybe sooner. And that activity in ministry is a demand and a requirement that you be as authentic as you can in what you do, and you don't do it for somebody else. You don't even do it for yourself. What you do is you serve your authentic calling, and you serve, in the vernacular of our day, you serve God. You serve life itself by being part of the mosaic you were born to be. And when you find yourself in the situation where you're doing that, then what will happen is that you will be a success and you will be a magnificent leader. Every time, and believe me, this isn't a 24/7 transformation of Ken Gordon. I still go through it. But the thing is, I do my spiritual practice and I recognize it and I shed it. I transform my belief around certain things to allow it to be eradicated from my experience. As spiritual leader for the last 4 years of a new organization with a new structure and everything else put with it, I don't want to mislead you and say that my life is all beautiful flowers and champagne and chocolate. Although it is. There are moments where I could allow resentment or pissed offivity to attack me, to allow it into my life so that I can say, oh, that person, they're no good, they're so stupid. Or I could say, that person just doesn't get it, they're not smart enough, they're not connected enough, they just don't have the consciousness for it. Or I could connect with it and I could say, they're not doing it right because it's not the way that I would do it, the way I've had an experience in the past. Or they insulted me, so I'm going to have vengeance. Does any of this sound familiar to your experience in life? And to be a real leader, what's required is that you get rid of it. That you just let it go. It's not true. And all it does is help build a foundation in your life that is the antithesis of what you want to live. It's the antithesis of the faith and the calling that you've been gifted with, that you've awakened to, that you're aware of. And so if you allow that to stand between you and your own joy, you and your own purpose, you and your own fulfillment, it's nobody's responsibility but yours. So when I say the most important thing to do as a leader in this movement is to do your own spiritual work, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about not allowing resentment, not allowing anger, not allowing judgment to skew my vision of a world that works for everyone and what is occurring and what is happening in my life within the individuals that are there. So I hope that's been of help to you. And it's been a joy, and I'll throw open the floor. I'd love to answer questions. And I'll answer anything, by the way. Some of it will be, I don't know, which is, but I'll give it a try.
Okay, so this is more of a personal question, just because I haven't stopped thinking about it. So you studied with Dr. Costa. My grandmother was a practitioner there, and I just didn't know if you ever knew her, Millie McQuillan.
Yes, for sure. I knew Millie. Yeah, but I was there. Deborah and I were there from 1986 to 1993, and like I said, we were farming, and we'd found it. My daughter was looking for Sunday school, so I was raised in a Methodist Lutheran mixed church in Canada, in Kelowna, and matter of fact, she's just down the street. And when I went there, we discovered the church because Kelsey, our daughter, was looking for Sunday school, and her Brownie leader, which was in partner with Deb, went to the center there, went to the religious science church there, and she invited us, and we went to take the kids. After 3 months, the kids didn't want to go anymore, and Deb and I were hooked. And my background is political science and philosophy, so it really fit well with what I was looking for. And I had the same story as every one of you had, which is I walked into the church and said, "Oh my God, I didn't know anybody thought like this.
Yeah.
I do, and I'm at home." And that's pretty much how it happened. Yeah. So yes, I knew Melanie.
That's why I'm here. So.
Yeah, for sure. Did she ever bring you to church?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, I thought I recognized you. You're the curly-haired little kid in the.
She was a light for sure. So.
Yeah. Well, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, the people who came before us worked their way through it in a magnificent way, and they really helped turn the world around. If you look at the world, I mean, yeah, we sometimes have a tendency to say, well, we haven't done a very good job. Well, that's because, you know what, we're cutting edge teaching and we're not mainstream. And if we were mainstream, then we wouldn't be doing our job. No, really, I mean, that's the truth. You know, how come there isn't, how come we're not Joel Osteen? And the reason is because we're cutting edge. We're the teaching that pulls Joel to the next step of evolution and what he's doing and how he's doing it. And that activity and that action is required that we be what it is that we talk about being, and that we be aware that our successes come in strange ways. In 1993, when I came up from Palm Desert to start the church, the first class I did was in a classroom at our public schools. And I walked inside thinking that I was like the pro from Dover. You know, I knew all this stuff. And nobody, believe me, nobody in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada at that time knew anything about metaphysics. And I walked inside the door, and there all along the roof beam of the classroom were all the sayings that I'd spent, affirmations that I'd spent the last 20 years or 6 years learning. And they were all written there for the grade 3 class that was there and part of that class. And where did they come from? They came from the consciousness that we are evoking and that we teach. And that we're always just a little bit ahead of the skew on everything that's happening. And with us comes the rest of humanity. So, you know, the political situation in the United States aside, we've definitely demonstrated some transformation in this world and the world around us than it ever was before.
So introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Oh, my name is Rosedale Jones. You know, we all have our different practices, and we do them in different ways, and we do what we do, and we come out feeling better, and it's all good. We have a place, and we have a different thing we do. Where and what do you practice, and how do you do it? What's your particular practice?
Okay. I have my own, and it works like this. I tried meditation for a while. It wasn't for me. In the way that I tried it. Okay. I most certainly do my treatment work. I do that. Every single morning of my life, I have my treatment work, and you know, we're the most praying group of people you'll ever meet in your life. I mean, we pray for, well, get in the car. Well, lights surround me. Here we go for a drive. I mean, you know, we do it. I do that stuff. But what my meditation worked into was a contemplation. The contemplation was self-absorbed, and I don't mean that to sound in the traditional way that it's egotistical. What it is it's looking at my life and asking myself certain questions. So if there is discomfort in my life in some area, whether it be health, wealth, creative expression, or loving relationship, or spiritual connection, if there is discomfort in my life, what I do in my contemplation, which I do every morning, is I ask myself where that comes from and what it is that I am hanging on to that allows me to be able to have that. Now, I'd like to say that every time I ask the question, the answer comes immediately, that the sky opens up, angels come down, and there's trumpets, and everything's done swell. No. But what happens is the question becomes an affirmation within my own mind, and the answer starts showing up in everything I do. So the end result is that if I'm feeling guilty about something, what occurs is that it becomes obvious in very short order that the guilt is what's really bothering me. So I look at it. I examine my life. And when I catch myself blaming someone, something outside of myself for something, what I do is I take that in as an indicator that there's transformation in my consciousness that needs to be done. Not from a Pollyanna point of view, but from a definite realization that if I want this discomfort to go away, I have to change my mind. Raymond Charles Barker, who is one of our great teachers who built that huge church in New York City, was actually one of my teachers. He moved to Palm Desert and taught with Tom Costa. And Barker once told me that when he ran into discomfort in his life, he went into his den in his apartment and he closed the door and he said, "Barker, you need a bigger idea." Now, looking at that from a metaphorical point of view, that's what we all need to do, is we need to go into the den of our own being, that place of safety within ourselves. And we need to declare that a bigger idea around the disappointment, a bigger idea around the resentment, a bigger idea around the discomfort needs to come forward so that we might heal it. And if we ask for it, what happens is it comes and it demonstrates a willingness on our behalf to be able to accept it. And then the other part is you need to accept it. You need to move forward and have grounding in faith, foundation in faith to such a degree that you know that that's the solution, that the solution isn't suing the person, the solution isn't hurting them, the solution isn't vengeance, the solution isn't, and when you've got that, then what you're doing is you're living a pretty joyful life. Can I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. This is Karen York from Phoenix. You talk about letting go of all resentment.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you do that with a forgiveness practice, or how do you just let go of all resentment?
Oh, good heavens. I just refuse to do things or to accept things that are based in resentment. And that, how did I do it originally? I did it originally by knowing that it's going to stop, and by just being aware that that belief system upsets things. Now, I repeat, I still get resentment, but I heal it. There's a difference. I mean, I still find myself in the moment resentful, and sometimes that moment lasts me a couple, 3 days. But I don't drag it around with me. I don't go out and find 63 of my closest friends to talk about it with. What I do is I deal with it. I don't like people. Well, that's not true. I do like people. I don't associate with people who support me in my limitation.
Oh, right on.
You know, there's lots of people who, if you went and told them that, you know, Catherine did this to me, okay, that they would say, "Oh, that Catherine, I know. Let me tell you, I've got a story about her. Let me go get my notes." I mean, you know, and they just lay it all out, right? Or they say, "Oh my God, I want to validate you on how miserable you are. If that had happened to me, I'd be miserable just like you."
No.
And we sometimes call these people friends.
Whoa.
And they're not. What I look for is I look for somebody that says, "Grow up. You know how this works. Get your butt up and get going."
That's right.
I probably don't have time to tell you another story, but
Yeah, please do.
Go ahead.
we need to surround ourselves with people who will tell us what we need to know. And then in order to surround ourselves with those people, it's a requirement that you be willing to accept it. Nothing, I mean, I mind my own business. If I see somebody that's totally out of principle and they haven't asked me for help and I don't know who they are or I'm not connected with them to some degree, I don't go over and say to them, you know, living your life like that probably isn't working very well. And here's why. I wait for somebody to come to me and to say, Dr. Ken, I've got a problem. Can you help me? We have lots of ministerial students that we've graduated out of Kelowna. And I'll share with you. I'll look over my shoulder and make sure Deborah's not around. Although she's probably listening upstairs. But I'll share with you. After they graduate, what happens is they phone and they have, Deborah is like their sponsor. And they're her children and she takes care of them and she's so sweet with them. And every now and then they'll phone and they'll say, I want to talk to Dr. Ken, not you. Why? Because I want to know the truth. And so then they'll phone me and they'll say, Ken, you know, I'm thinking of quitting. This is happening. That's happening. And they know that in 20 minutes, what I'll do is say, I'll take them back to where the problem is. I'll take them back to the first cause within themselves. I'll take them back to the belief, and I won't let them get away with being coddled, and I won't validate their fears or their feelings. I'll point it out for where it is. But believe me, I don't go down to their church and knock on the door and say, let me help you. What I wait for them to do is to call me, and when they do, what I do is I tell them what the truth is behind it. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do know that it works for me and it works for them. At least the ones who call. The ones who don't call, I guess they don't call because it doesn't work for them. What can I say?
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, this is Pam Crosby Brandon, and we've met several times with my husband Michael.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Yes, and shorter hair. And anyway, I had an experience one time. We were at the Practitioner Plus in LA, and something happened at home office, and I came up to you and I said, I complained. And you said, oh, it'll work out fine. Don't worry about it. And then it was like, but you would, that's just where you were. And so this is exactly what you've been talking about. And so my first reaction was, well, that's no good. But then I sat with it, and it allowed me to go to that place where, well, it is okay. You know, time, it doesn't matter with the length of time, it is okay. And it allowed me to move into non-judgment and to not blame anybody and just know that everybody has good intentions. And I did some things that moved it along a little bit, but it's okay. You know, it really, that little moment really taught me a lot about letting go of all of that angst, and it's part of what prepared me to say yes to the calling of ministry. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And that here's one of my best answers when people come to me with complaints about things that are happening within Centers for Spiritual Living. I say it's John Waterhouse's fault. So you have to go talk to Dr. John. And the reason is because I'm a spiritual leader. My job is to model this teaching, but my job isn't to run the factory.
Whoa.
When you start a church or get into a center, I suggest that you surround yourself with people who know how to run the factory, so that you can do your job and you don't have to be involved in those sections that are there. And that be one of the priorities and one of the first things that you do. And then let them run the factory. Don't go stick your nose in and run it for them. Let them do the job of running the factory, and you do the job of the transformation of consciousness of your congregants. And the only way you can do it is by staying in principle. And the only way you can stay in principle is to stop judging and stop analyzing. Now, in the meantime, things have to get done. They have to work. So it requires that we learn how to do it in a manner which is congruent with who we want to be and who we are, as opposed to trying to fix everything that comes down the pike and not allowing anybody else to participate in it because we know the difference between the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. And so there's a very, very narrow ledge to walk when you start off doing that. Because you still have to pay the bills and run the business. But on the other hand, you need to do it with the consciousness of an enlightened soul, not with the consciousness of somebody who's needy and needs to manifest it. And that probably is going to be the biggest growth in the next 5 years for those of you who are willing to take the journey. One of my teachers, Dr. James Golden, once told me, I had a circumstance where I happened to be sitting with him. He was president of International at the time, and I was in Bellingham, Washington at a regional ministers meeting. And as it turned out, it was just James and I sitting at this table once. And I was brand new in ministry, and James said, "So how's your ministry going?" And I said, "Oh, Dr. James, it's just going spectacular." I said, "I'm finally coming to the place in my consciousness where I realize that I don't have to fix anyone, that everything is perfect, whole, and complete just the way it is." Mm-hmm. And Dr. James said, "Oh, so you're not doing your job?" And I said, "What do you mean I'm not doing my job?" He said, "You're not doing your job." He said, "Your job is to build, develop, and grow your center so that you can take this teaching out into this world and transform the world. And if you're sitting back just allowing anybody to be anything, anytime, then you're not doing your job." And I said, "Well, how in heaven's name can I do that and still be in the teaching?" And he said, "Ken, you need to learn to have a sacred heart. And a sacred heart allows you to have somebody come up to you in a meeting and say, this, and this is terrible, and you not buy into it, but at the same time have the energy and the clarity to be able to respond to it in a way and a means that is not about control, but it's about direction and how to direct something. And the day will come when you have to tell your bookkeeper how to direct something. The day will come when you have to tell a staff minister how to do something. And it won't be pleasant, it won't be nice if you don't have a sacred heart. So for the last 20 years, I have been practicing having a sacred heart and carrying on conversations from that sacred heart, as opposed to me knowing the difference between me knowing what's right and you not knowing, or being vengeful in my approach to something. I speak into people's listening.
So Dr. Sorry, one more, and then I've got.
Can you just, hi, this is Nicole. Can you just speak for a moment on the spiritual leadership of the co-ministry, of shared leadership with you and your wife?
Sure.
How that showed up?
Well, it just always was. We were together when we entered. We've been together for 42 years, in ministry for 23. So we were already together for 19 years when we started the ministry. And we'd already had a working relationship. And okay, but a little bit about relationships based on trust. And I don't know who you're talking about doing co-ministry with, but if you don't trust them unconditionally, then you're probably going to have a little bit of a challenge. You have to have the trust. And what happened for Deborah and I was our skill sets both rose. She's excellent at what she does, and I'm pretty good at what I do. And so what has occurred is that I let her do hers and I do mine. And that includes speaking and doing everything else, different styles, different ways of teaching. And it's worked for us. It's worked really well. I learned a long time ago that I have two higher powers. Just a second, I got to check with my higher power. What do you think, Deb? So, I mean, there is that connector that goes with it. But that's because I know who she is and I trust her. And vice versa, I would think. So dealing with humanity is all based on trust. And reading whether or not you can trust that person is the most important thing. And in ministry, because you're going, especially starting out in ministry, all of you are going to make a metamorphosis of your life when you enter ministry, if you enter ministry. If you choose to step into it, what will happen is that there will be a transformation that takes place. All of the stuff that needs to be healed in your life will come up for you to be able to deal with it, because God's not going to let you carry the word if you're not clean. And so what will happen when that happens is you need someone to rely on, or else you need to be able to trust your own self to be able to handle it. And if you're in partnership with someone who the trust is questionable, as you go through the metamorphosis, what it's going to do is add to the friction and add to the irritation instead of helping alleviate it and take it away. And that really is what it's about. So you need to be in connection with people who are willing to grow with you. You know, Deb and I say, you know, you grow together or grow apart. That's our affirmation, and we grow together. And growing together is a funny thing because, you know, one of my common phrases is, are we on the same page? And I gave a talk once, and I said, you know, with Deb, talking about Deb and I said, Deb and I aren't always on the same page. And, you know, sometimes we're not even in the same chapter. But I guarantee you we're always in the same book.
Hello.
And that's the important part of that relationship with someone that's so connected at that intimate level. That's important. We don't always agree with each other, but we always trust each other to know that that disagreement isn't something that's destructive. It's something that's creative or potentially creative. And we allow ourselves to be individuals to be able to live it. I can't imagine starting a ministry with someone who I didn't have that level of trust with. I would find that would be very, very challenging. And it might be because I don't have the consciousness for it and I'm not broad enough to be able to accept it. Or then again, it might be because that's a requirement to have that level of intimacy within your own ministry. And if you're going to share it with someone, you better have it with them. There's more than you ever wanted to know.
Go ahead.
So we're coming to the end of our time, my promised hour for you, but I wanted to ask one more thing for you to comment on. And that is, you know, over this past, especially the last year or so, there's been a number of situations that you as spiritual leader have had to address within our organization and beyond. And the latest one being the decision about Nashville and that change. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to us about that process for you and how that works. You know, the letters that you write, the statements, the position statements that you bring forward are so clear and so inspirational. And the you know, decisions have been so right on. I'm just curious about if you have any thoughts on sharing about what the process of coming forward with those would be.
Yes, I would love to. So firstly, when those things occur, I go through my process just like everybody else does. Please appreciate the fact that, you know, that's when I have to do my work. That's when, and it has to be done quickly so I can get the letter out. So the first thing I do is I won't write a letter on a situation. I won't write a paper on a situation if I'm embroiled and angry about it and if I'm not principled around it. So the first thing I do is I clear myself and I allow that to take place. And there's been circumstances and situations where I found it really challenging to do that, and then I get help. I have lots of people helping me do that. Kathy Hearn, Edward Vilhoon, Jim Lockhart, Michelle Sinegal, David Alexander. They're all people that I go to for my social action committee is what I call them. They're all people that help me make sure that I'm balanced when I put it out. That's firstly. Secondly is, it goes back to 2011 when we voted in the our ODM, our organizational design model, which contains within it all of our values and all of our principles. And the reason I share this part of it is because we came together in 2011, both United and International, when we were doing the integration, and we voted for that ODM 98% in favor. Up until that time, there was no such document. And so what would happen is if somebody took a stand on marriage equality rights, then somebody else could say, you're not speaking for me. That's not what I believe in. That's not the truth for me. And it allowed that subject of idea to become fractured within our organization. And we did that for 90 years. With the development of the ODM, it's really simple. If you go to the organizational design model, it says what we believe in. And we're in agreement, 98%, that we agree with that. So therefore, I can make statements that never were made in science of mind, religious science before. I can make statements because I have it in black and white in front of me that's been voted on, and I know what the principles and the values of our organization are. So I know the ODM, so I know that I reflect the ODM into those essays. I do not reflect what Ken Gordon thinks into those essays. Make sense? And the same thing holds when you teach this stuff. That's why we're doing this theme 2016, is to teach what our principles are. And next year, I think we're going to do values. But the point is, behind it is, so that what we can do is we can get the integrated whole of who we are to know what we believe and act from the same way. You know, there's 250,000 to 500,000 religious scientists in the world. I don't know if you're aware that those would be the numbers. But Church of Choice, there's up to 500,000 of us. What we're attempting to do is create a collective consciousness to transform the world. And it's really important that 500,000 people know what we believe and believe the same thing. That's what's going to make the difference. So I strongly suggest you read the ODM. And to answer Reverend Catherine's question directly to her, I write those in union with other people. I write them by myself, but I always write them from a place of cleanliness within my own consciousness and my own being. And when I write it from that point of view, it can't be wrong. And it's a reflection of what our belief system is that's laid out in our organizational design model.
Thank you. So, Dr. Ken, I need to tell you that one of the things that I'm trying to impress upon our students is that we become a spiritual leader by right of consciousness, that it's part of the path. And it's really clear that by right of consciousness, you are the perfect spiritual leader for this organization. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you for we love you. We're grateful for you. And
We'll see you at graduation.
We'll see you at graduation.
It's like not long from now. It's like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Thank you.
Holy cow, have I got a lot to learn in 3 weeks. Bless you. Bless you, and thank you for having me. I'm absolutely honored to have been able to address this class. You are brilliant lights in the world, and the world needs you. What you're doing right now is greater than anything you've done before, no matter what. And Reverend Catherine's absolutely right. It's consciousness. And that's where we're moving to, that's where we're moving from, and that's who we are. So bless you and know your love. Thank you.
Great, so we'll take a 15-minute.
Oh,
reconvene
awesome.
there.
That was great.
Isn't that great?
He's unreal.